there, Sophie Glenn here, and in this video we'll be talking about the miter saw. Sometimes it gets called the chop saw, but the miter saw is just this little DeWalt guy here. So what this does is essentially cuts bigger pieces of wood into smaller pieces of wood. So if I put this here, drop this down, it'll do all that cutting for me, all right? So first and foremost, we'll talk about some of the specifics about this saw, and then I'll get into some of the safety precautions that you should take while you're using it. So first, typically in the shop, if I haven't come in yet and opened it up, it'll be in this orientation, so it's shut down for the day. So it happens to be in this way, and if I forget to open it up for whatever reason, what you do is you press this all the way down, and then with this lock right over here, you just pull this little pin out, and it would open back up. The nice thing about this saw is that it's got this little safety guard on it, so it's actually covering up the blade so you're not exposed to a 12-inch blade, which we don't want. So as you're dropping this down, this safety guard comes up and covers the blade the entire way down when you're chopping. So that's really a nice thing about it. It's called a miter saw mostly because it cuts miters really effectively. So you can cut miters in two different ways. So you can cut miters this way by pushing this little lever underneath up and then moving it this way or that way. So depending on what you're making and what size miter you need to cut. So if you need to cut a 45, you can cut a 45 here, and it's got a little miter gauge here so you can get an accurate measurement for that angle. And then you just lock it back in place, and it should lock in place like that. And it goes either direction, and you have a span of 50 degrees in either direction, so it's really pretty nice. So you can get most angles out of it. So when you're done cutting your miter, you always want to set it to back to 0 for the next person, because that's just common courtesy. So that's that miter gauge. And then we'll go to the other miter gauge, which is actually tilting the blade this way or that way. So here, there's two different locks. There's one lock back here, so you need to open this up. And then there's a little switch down here, so I can tilt this either this way or that way. So depending again on what I'm cutting and what kind of angle I need to cut it at, I can set this accordingly too. So again, just like this miter, when we're done with that, we want to set this back at 0. Oh, sorry, before I get into that, when you're setting it at your angle, you want to lock this piece back and then shut this back down so it doesn't move out of place. All right, so then when you're done, you can unlock this again, open this back up, and then set it at 0. So to make sure that's pretty accurate, you can take a speed square or a combination square and just set that up. And if you have any gap in between the blade and the speed square, then you know you're out of square. So right there's pretty good. And you'll notice that I'm measuring in between the teeth here. So if you're measuring off one of the teeth, then that's going to give you an inaccurate measurement. So you want to make sure that you're measuring that angle right at where the teeth are. So for the sake of the video, we'll say that that's accurate where it is, and we'll set that up. So now that's locked back into place, and it's right back at 0 where we want it. All right, so that's essentially the miter gauge and some of the specifics about it. So now we'll go into some of the safety precautions that we need to take when we're working on it. So first and foremost, like any other machine in the shop, you want to make sure that the dust collection is on. So our dust collection system is in the back here. And for the sake of the video, I won't turn it on because it is quite loud, but you do want to make sure that the dust collection is on because this does accumulate a lot of dust. As you can see, this has fallen off again. So you do want to make sure that when your dust collection's on, it's actually connected to the dust collection system, right? So we want to make sure that that's all set up too. So this is all just part of the experience of working in a wood shop, making sure everything's working properly. And once you get into the swing of things, then this all becomes more normalized when you start to work more and more in the wood shop. Okay. Second thing is to always wear ear and eye protection. So I got my safety glasses right here. And I have some earplugs in my pocket. So I'll make sure that these are in place too. Okay, if you haven't watched any of my safety videos so far, you do want to make sure to check them out so you get a little bit more detail as to what kinds of safety glasses you need to wear and other kinds of PPE you should wear. But again, this is quite loud, so you do want to make sure you're protecting your hearing, and then you are going to get dust in the face. So if you want to wear a face shield, that's fine too, but safety glasses should do the trick. Again, just like any other machine, you also want to make sure that the area is pretty clean of any debris. We have concrete floors here, so the floors do get slippery, and you can't see it, but we have a nice little rubber mat underneath me, so that keeps it from being a very slick surface. But if someone's been working on here and they left a mess behind, just make sure to go get them and make sure they clean up after themselves, and that goes the same for you as well. So we always want to clean up after ourselves, or before we start working and after we work. Okay, so the area is pretty clean, so I don't have to worry about that. There's some dust floating around, but it's not a big deal. So I'm pretty much ready to start cutting now. So what should I look for in a piece of wood when I need to cut it down? So this is a pretty nice size for a piece of wood. So this is a little over 12 inches, and to be exact, it's about 16 inches. So when you're cutting down your piece of wood, your piece of wood should always be at least 12 inches in length. So no shorter than that, really. If you have something shorter than that, you might be able to cut it up on a bandsaw, or you can come grab me if I'm in the shop and I can cut it for you, since I'm a little bit more experienced at these machines. But generally speaking, you want your wood to be at least 12 inches in length. Okay, so when you're holding this up, you'll see that the miter saw has this nice long fence up against here. So it's really great for cutting down like 8 or 9 foot boards to shorter, more manageable lengths. But the other nice thing about this fence is that it's helping you to hold it up against there. So if I have like a really wonky piece of wood, so if it's got like a bow in it, or if it's got a little bit of a twist in it, you want to make sure that you have it nice and flush up against that fence. If not, then what could happen is the piece of wood could fly into your face or into the surrounding area, and we really don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure that your piece of wood is nice and flush up against here. And with that too, so you want to pick the side that's the straightest. So in this case, it's this side here, or yeah, the straightest of the two sides, and just make sure it's nice and flush up against here. So again, when you're cutting, you also want to make sure your hand's not too close to the blade, right? So that seems like a pretty obvious thing, but you have to make sure that your hand is as far away from the tool as possible. Generally speaking, at least 6 inches is good, so somewhere in this region. Luckily, we have these nice little wooden blocks back here, so usually if my hand's right behind that wooden block, that's a pretty safe zone. And usually there's little no hand signs here too, so there's little lines with little no hand signs. So if your hand's anywhere from here to the blade, that's no zone, very bad zone. So you want to go outside of that zone. So a good saw will have these little safety precautions on them, but if not, generally 6 inches away from the blade is pretty standard. So I can cut safely over here, and this is nice. So I'm pushing my hand up against the fence and holding it up top here, and I can go ahead and cut straight down. So again, I'm firmly supporting the wood, and I can go ahead and cut this down. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. So I'll put my earplugs in. So another thing too, when you finish your cut, you want to make sure that you have the blade come to a complete stop before you bring it back up. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'll just cut the little end off here. Again, I'll hold it back here. So you push the trigger up here in the handle. Then have it come to a complete stop, and then you bring it back up, just like that. So another thing too is you want to make sure that you're cutting all the way through your piece of wood, so you don't have to cut into it again in case you do that. See, fell off again.
Damn dust collection system.
And that's pretty much that. So for example, if you're trying to cut multiple pieces at the same length, say you're making some table legs and all your legs need to be the same exact length, what you can do in this case is actually set up a stop block, which is just a random piece of wood, hopefully with a nice square corner on it. And I could measure from the blade, so I'm not turning the blade on. Let me go to it from this side for the sake of, oh, nope, never mind. I'll do it over here. So without turning this on, I can measure from the blade. Let's say I need it at 22 inches where it's at now. And then I could take one of these quick clamps here and just clamp it to the fence. Oops, do a little bit. now I can just line up my piece of wood up against this little stop block, and I can have perfectly, all my cuts perfectly at the same length. So that's a really nice, helpful thing to work out too. So I'll demonstrate that really quick. So I have another longer piece of wood here. So again, I'm making sure it's nice and flush up against this fence and making sure, so I'll check both sides, see if there's one side that's better than the other. So here there's a little bit of a bow in this piece of wood here. So I'm going to press this down and hold it up against the fence just like so. So I'll start that again as well. That's one piece. So I have enough room here, but I can also go lefty on this too, so I can hold it up against here and then just use my left hand to push this down. Alright. Now hopefully in a perfect world, these will be more or less the same length, which they are, so just like that. Alright, so I think that pretty much covers the miter saw, so if you have any questions, just let me know.